My name is Natalie Mercer. I am 31 years old, and 3 weeks ago my mother pointed toward the front door and ordered me to leave and never return. She was yelling so intensely that her voice broke, as if I had committed something unforgivable, as if I had become a weight she had finally chosen to discard. So I left. I did not plead, I did not debate, and I did not point out that I had spent years silently holding together the life she stood inside. I simply grabbed my bag, stepped out of that house, and allowed the door to close behind me. What she failed to realize was that some doors do not only close on an emotional level, they close on a financial one too. The odd thing is that I had not gone there seeking conflict. I went there the way I always did, attempting to maintain harmony, trying to behave as though the subtle insults, the icy attitude, and the constant criticism did not affect me deeply. But that afternoon, something was spoken, something was revealed, and suddenly I was no longer considered family. I had become an outsider, a source of shame, a difficulty that required removal. For the first few days after I departed, I kept waiting for my phone to ring with an apology, or at least with enough respect to check if I was all right. That call never arrived. What did arrive, weeks later, was my father standing before me with an expression I had never witnessed before, asking one single question in a tone that sounded more frightened than upset. He wanted to know why the mortgage payments had stopped coming in. I looked at him and offered the only response that felt logical after everything that had occurred. I am not your child. Not in the way that appeared to count to them. And once I share what led up to that instant, you will see why those 6 words struck deeper than any shout my mother directed at me that day. Before I describe what she said after the truth emerged, and what took place when I truly walked away, tell me what time it is where you are right now and where you are watching from. Because I genuinely want to discover just how widely this story spreads. I grew up in Matthews, just beyond Charlotte, in the sort of area where every home appeared steady from the road, even when the individuals inside were scarcely keeping things intact. We were never the family that seemed overly dramatic. We appeared ordinary. Neat lawn, reasonable porch, church during holidays, courteous smiles in the driveway. But finances had always represented a silent crisis in our home, the type nobody mentioned openly unless matters worsened enough to spark accusations. My father had worked for years in warehouse management, forever promising the next role would improve things, always convinced one more stable period would resolve everything. My mother handled the reception at a children's medical office and treated outward image like an additional full-time responsibility. We could be late on payments, yet she still demanded the house remain immaculate, the drapes ironed, the neighbors persuaded we were managing perfectly. I learned early that in our household, honesty counted for less than outward show. I was the one who worked hard in school, avoided problems, earned scholarships, picked up extra hours, and created a path that made others comment I was headed for success. By the time I reached my late 20s, I held a reliable position in healthcare compliance, a pleasant apartment in Charlotte, and sufficient financial security to relax without examining my bank balance multiple times daily. Then my father lost his job, and whatever delicate equilibrium my parents had been faking fell apart quickly. They lagged on the mortgage, then fell further behind, and by the time my mother finally phoned me in tears, the bank was already dispatching notices with wording serious enough to make my heart sink. She kept repeating they were about to lose the home, that all they had built was on the verge of vanishing, that she had no idea how to proceed. I still recall standing in my kitchen with the phone held to my ear, gazing out the window while she wept, and sensing that familiar instinct rise up. The one that had trailed me throughout my entire existence. Fix it, do not question who caused the disorder, do not question why no one prepared in advance, simply fix it, so I did. I settled the past due balance initially, then contacted the mortgage company, raised issues my parents had never bothered to raise, and determined how severe the situation truly was. Worse than they had confessed, worse than they likely grasped. No miraculous fix was on the way, no family member stepping forward, no savings account, no safety net. There was only me. I arranged automatic transfers from my personal account and convinced myself it would be short-term, just until they regained stability, just until matters settled. just until I could relax again without fearing the home I was raised in would be sold, because nobody inside knew how to confront facts. Short term stretched into 4 years. 4 years of regular deductions, so routine they integrated into my routine like rent or food shopping, except these transfers were not sheltering a roof above my own head. They were sheltering one above people who never fully stopped behaving as if I were the challenging member. My mother never understood the complete details of what I had organized, and truthfully, she preferred not to. She favored the story where the bank had arranged something, and daily life could resume its outwardly proper form. My father inquired even less than others, which served as its own reply. He was the type of man who confused quietness with respect and evasion with calm. If an issue could be postponed, he postponed it. If strain appeared, he navigated around it like an object in the room. In the meantime, I turned into the unseen pillar supporting the entire structure. I drove over most Sundays for meals or gatherings, brought supplies more frequently than not, repaired items in the house when they failed, and heard my mother criticize others who, in her view, were self-centered, superficial, careless, demanding, or thankless. Depending on the day, I somehow represented all four. She enjoyed pointing out that I resided in the city now, that I held a tidy office position, that I could not grasp what genuine stress felt like. She dismissed my comments about work, remarked on how I was perpetually occupied, then appeared hurt if I skipped a weekend. If I purchased something pleasant for myself, she would note it must be simple to spend freely when you had no one else depending on you. If I saw someone, she spotted a defect. If I remained unattached, that turned into a defect as well. Nothing concerning me was ever quite adequate. My father would remain seated through it all, occasionally watching television, occasionally mixing his drink, occasionally offering me that weary glance men like him provide when they seek recognition for not causing the harm. My younger brother had already realized what I needed years to accept. He relocated to Denver, maintained distance, and restricted family interactions to the absolute minimum. I once believed that showed he was distant. Later, I understood it showed he was well enough to depart. I was the one who remained because I believed faithfulness meant persisting. I delayed purchasing my own home because I was covering theirs. I declined vacations because there was constantly some cost at the house. I convinced myself I felt no bitterness, then questioned why I felt drained constantly. The reality was harsh and straightforward. I was funding the security of a family that continued to view me as if I were failing some unattainable emotional standard. And since nobody knew the complete facts, nobody needed to feel thankful. They kept their home and their self-respect. I kept issuing payments and acting as if affection and duty were identical. Everything exploded on a Sunday that began so routinely, it should have alerted me. I drove to Matthew's around noon, collected beverages along the route, and entered the backyard to discover my mother already displaying cheerfulness. She was in one of those states where every remark sounded upbeat if you ignored the undertones. She had set up the outdoor seating, prepared excess food, and kept noting that she had major ideas developing. I should have realized that indicated she was attempting to demonstrate something. While we ate, she finally mentioned it. She said she had spoken with someone regarding refinancing, perhaps extracting money from the property, perhaps taking a wise step for once instead of merely holding onto value. Then she chuckled and remarked maybe she earned a new vehicle after all this time. Maybe she and my father could at last enjoy a voyage like others their age. She stated it loudly enough for me to catch the implication beneath. We are all right. We are better than all right. We are the sort who still possess choices. I recall gazing at her and questioning how profound denial could actually become. Then her phone rang. She checked the display, grinned as if preparing to seal an impressive arrangement, and answered on speaker without stepping away from the table. At first it seemed standard. Identity check. Property location. A few courteous inquiries. Then the loan representative mentioned a complication with the records. He said the payment record showed a steady external contributor over the previous 48 months, and that they required explanation because the account handling the mortgage transfers did not belong to either borrower named on the loan. I doubt I will ever forget the quiet that descended on that yard following those statements. My mother's expression shifted so rapidly, it was nearly difficult to follow. One moment she appeared assured, the next she appeared vulnerable, then enraged. She removed the phone from speaker, but it was already too late. Everyone at that table had heard sufficient. She concluded the call, turned gradually toward me, and I sensed what was approaching before she uttered anything. She asked me what that lady was referring to, and when I did not reply quickly enough, she rose and asked more forcefully. I attempted to maintain a steady tone. I told her I had been ensuring the mortgage was covered. I told her I did it because the house had been days from crisis the initial time, and because afterward, nobody in that home ever approached financial steadiness enough to sustain it. I believed perhaps the facts would strike with surprise first, perhaps appreciation afterward, perhaps embarrassment in between. What I did not anticipate was the instant fury. She accused me of embarrassing her, of acting secretly behind their backs, of behaving as if I controlled the house, as if I controlled them. She said I wanted others to view her as incapable, that I had done it to feel above them, that this was precisely what occurred when offspring earned too much and disregarded their origins. I told her nobody had disregarded their origins more than the individuals sitting in a house they had not truly been covering. That was the instant everything fractured. She began yelling so loudly the neighbors could likely catch every word through their barriers. Ungrateful, deceitful, conceited. She said I had no authority to meddle in their affairs, no authority to choose for them, no authority to convert their home into some assistance effort. I glanced at my father because part of me still hoped he might act if matters worsened sufficiently. He did not. He sat there appearing shocked, but not shocked enough to speak, not shocked enough to support me. Not shocked enough to state that perhaps the woman funding the mortgage for 4 years did not deserve to be yelled at in her own childhood backyard. Then my mother pointed toward the gate and uttered the words that altered everything. Leave and never come back. The type of quiet that follows a statement like that differs from regular quiet. It is not vacant, it is conclusive. I recall standing there for a moment, hoping she might retract it, hoping my father would intervene, hoping for one proper impulse from someone. None arrived. So I entered the house, collected the overnight bag I occasionally left in my former room, and stepped back out without further dispute, because suddenly I comprehended something I should have recognized years before. If I had to justify my right to basic respect in a house I was helping maintain, then nothing about my presence there qualified as affection anymore. By the time I reached my apartment in Charlotte, I was still trembling. I opened my computer, accessed the automatic transfer, and stared at the display for perhaps 10 seconds before I terminated it. No declaration, no theatrical music, just one click. Then I exited the family group chat, set my phone to silent, and allowed them to exist inside the results of my absence for the first time in years. The first week afterward felt oddly subdued, as if the world had become muted. I attended work, replied to messages, participated in discussions, and behaved as if my entire family had not exploded over grilled food and hidden finances. At night, I replayed the dispute in my mind and kept returning to the same doubts. Had she truly intended it? Had my father truly permitted me to depart like that? Had I genuinely just halted the mortgage on the house I had safeguarded for years? The answer to all three was yes, but my emotions trailed behind the facts. I still found myself reaching for my phone on Sundays from routine, still considered whether they required supplies, still possessed those small, conditioned urges that make individuals like me so simple to exploit. My closest friend Erica was the first person who refused to let me idealize any of it. She arrived with food, heard the full account, and then spoke the statement that made me lean back in my seat and fall silent. She said, "Natalie, the only time they treated you like family was when you were beneficial." I wanted to disagree. I wanted to claim it was more complex than that. But the power of a direct statement is that it slices through all the duty-based haze. I began counseling that same week because I knew if I did not, I would eventually persuade myself to return to the same setup just to ease the remorse. Meanwhile, the texts began. At first they arrived from my father and pretended nothing had occurred. "How is work? Are you all right? Call us when possible." Then the tone changed. "Have you contacted the bank recently?" There appears to be a problem with the mortgage system. A notice arrived by post. Then, once they linked the clear facts, my mother started sending messages via others because she had blocked me herself in a burst of ego and apparently had not considered that detail. My aunt texted that my mother was quite distressed about some banking mix-up. A cousin inquired if I knew why my parents had received a default alert. Erica viewed one text and chuckled in astonishment. She said your mother truly said leave and never come back, then seemed surprised when your support left too. Weeks went by and I remained firm. The house was now experiencing what homes experience when nobody covers them. Late charges accumulated, calls intensified, warning notices grew harsher. My father finally stopped acting as if this were a simple glitch and began attempting to contact me with real desperation. I still did not reply. Not because I was heartless, but because I understood precisely how these patterns operated. If I permitted them to bypass the section where they recognized what occurred, they would jump directly back to the section where I resolved everything and they absorbed nothing. My counselor helped me express something I had never permitted myself to voice openly. I was not deserting my family. I was exiting a position they had given me without agreement and then criticized me for performing too effectively. That distinction was important. Around week 3, my brother phoned and said he had spoken with our father. He said the bank was acting quicker than they anticipated and our mother was in complete crisis. He also mentioned something else that remained with me. He said Dad only detects a fire when the smoke reaches him. A few days later, my building's reception called up to report a man was downstairs requesting me. It was my father. He had never visited my apartment before, not once, not when I settled in. Not on birthdays, not from interest, not from approval. But suddenly, because the mortgage funds had ceased, he had located my address and completed the journey. I met him in the entrance area because I was not prepared to bring that discussion into my residence. He appeared older than he had a month earlier. Shoulders hunched, eyes weary. The type of weary that stems from dread more than years. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then he asked if we could sit, and we shifted to a pair of seats near the windows. He did not linger on pleasantries. Perhaps he finally realized he had no space left for them. He looked at me and asked, "Why did you stop paying the mortgage?" There it was. The question that had journeyed all the way from their house to my building. The question that counted more than why I left. More than how I was feeling. More than whether I had eaten or rested or spent 3 full Sundays attempting not to weep in my own kitchen. I looked back at him and said, "I am not your child." He blinked as if he believed he had misheard me, so I repeated it more slowly. "I am not your child, not in the way that seems to matter to either of you." He asked what that was intended to mean. And for the first time in my life, I didn't soften a single word to make it easier for him to accept. I explained that it meant the moment my mother yelled at me to leave and never return, while he sat there and allowed it to happen. I stopped being their daughter in every way that actually mattered to them. I told him that when bills needed paying, I was family. When the house needed rescuing, I was family. When groceries arrived, when repairs were taken care of, when money flowed in quietly so they could continue pretending everything was stable, then I was completely family. But when the truth surfaced, when my mother felt ashamed, when she needed someone to blame for her own embarrassment, suddenly I became an outsider, an intruder. An ungrateful burden to be thrown away. I said I was no longer willing to pay for the right to be disrespected. At first, he tried to defend my mother in the same old way he always had. He said she was emotional, that she felt embarrassed, that she didn't truly mean it. I asked him which part she didn't mean. The part where she pointed at the gate. The part where she told me never to come back. The part where she blocked me and shared her own version of events with relatives. He had no reply for that, so I continued. I told him what I had needed him to understand for years. That silence is not neutrality when someone keeps getting hurt. That sitting there quietly every time my mother attacked me had not made him peaceful. It had made him comfortable at my cost. I told him he had accepted my help for years without ever asking what it was costing me, because it was easier than facing the truth about how much he depended on me. He looked down at his hands, and for the first time I saw something in him I had rarely seen before. Shame that wasn't defensive. Shame that had finally reached real recognition. He admitted they could not afford the house without my help. He admitted he had suspected more than he had ever asked about. He admitted he had let my mother's pride control the emotional atmosphere of the family because confronting her felt more difficult than watching me take the damage. Then he said he was sorry. And because I had waited so many years to hear anything close to honesty from him, it actually hit me. Not enough to erase everything. Not enough to make me restart the payments. But enough to open something inside. He asked what it would take to have one family conversation without it becoming another disaster. I told him I would agree to a single meeting under clear conditions. No shouting, no rewriting the past, no assumption that I would start paying the mortgage again just because they were now afraid. If my mother wanted any kind of relationship with me going forward, she would have to face what she had done, not just what it had cost her. He nodded and said he understood. I believed that he truly meant it, which felt new. Before he left, he stood there awkwardly for a moment as if he wanted to hug me but wasn't sure he had earned it. He hadn't. Not really. But I allowed it anyway, because sometimes people don't receive forgiveness and comfort at the same pace. As he walked out of my building, I remained in the lobby and stared through the glass for a long time. I wasn't proud of their pain. I wasn't taking pleasure in their fear. But for the first time, the heavy weight of that house was no longer pressing on my chest, and I could finally tell the difference between guilt and grief. The family meeting took place the following Sunday, exactly 4 weeks after my mother had thrown me out. I drove to the house and sat in my car for a full minute before entering, because some places remember the old version of you too clearly. I rang the doorbell instead of using the key I still had, and that small decision carried more weight than I expected. My father opened the door almost right away. My mother was already seated in the living room, sitting rigidly on the couch with the body language of someone ready to defend herself before any words were spoken. I remained standing until my father invited me to sit, and even then I chose the chair directly across from them instead of my usual spot that would have made it feel like I still belonged. At first, my mother tried the same approach she had likely been repeating to herself for weeks. She spoke about the bank, the notices, the deadlines, the pressure. She talked as if the crisis had appeared suddenly, as if some external force had struck the family without warning. Finally, I asked her one direct question. Is there anything you want to say to me before you start talking about what you need from me? That was the moment the entire room changed. She looked at me, then away, then back again. She said she might have overreacted. I told her that ordering your daughter to get out and never come back was not an overreaction. It was a choice. My father surprised me by supporting me. He said, "No, Sharon, you threw her out. You don't get to minimize that now just because the results have arrived." My mother looked shocked, but he continued. He said we accepted her help and turned it into something shameful because facing our own reality felt harder than simply saying thank you. I reached into my bag and took out the payment records. 4 years of monthly mortgage payments, neatly printed, every transfer clearly documented. I placed them on the table and pushed them toward them. My father began turning the pages and grew pale halfway through. My mother stared at the total amount as if it had personally attacked her. Maybe it had. There it was in plain black and white, proof that the daughter she had labeled selfish had been supporting their entire household from afar while being criticized for not showing love correctly. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. She said thank you first, and then she said she was sorry. Not elegant, not flawless, not without pride, but genuine enough that I could see fear had finally brought honesty into the room. She admitted that discovering I had been paying the mortgage made her feel small. It made her feel exposed. It made her feel like every critical word she had ever said about my life had been exposed for what it truly was. Jealousy, avoidance, resentment toward the child who got away and succeeded. Hearing her admit it didn't heal me, but it made everything clear. Some people don't resent your strength because it harms them. They resent it because it shows what they have refused to create in themselves. Then we reached the part that truly mattered. I told them I was not going back to making the mortgage payments. Not for a month, not while they sorted things out, not while feelings were intense. I was finished being the invisible safety net that allowed everyone to avoid growing up. What I was willing to offer was help creating a real plan, budget properly, sell if necessary, downsize, get stable, but I would no longer fund their illusions. My father agreed right away. My mother cried, not the dramatic tears I had grown up seeing, but the quieter kind that appears when pride finally breaks instead of performing. The bank's deadline gave them almost no time, and once we reviewed the real numbers, even my mother could see the reality. They could not keep that house, not without me. And I was no longer willing to play that role. The following month was harsh. They put the house on the market quickly, accepted a lower offer than they once would have, and watched a future they had pretended was safe shrink into something far more limited. Their new home became a two-bedroom condo outside their old neighborhood, practical, manageable, and nothing like the house my mother had used for years as evidence that she was doing well. She had to add evening shifts at the clinic twice a week, and a weekend scheduling job from home just to meet the new budget and rebuild a small financial cushion. The new SUV vanished from conversation. So did the cruise. Even more painful for her than the money loss was the social fallout. A few relatives learned enough of the truth to connect the pieces. The daughter she had painted as cold and selfish had actually been the one holding the roof over their heads. My mother never uttered the word humiliated, but she didn't have to. I could see it in how she stopped sharing her polished family stories once reality had clear names and numbers attached. My father changed in smaller but deeper ways. He began managing bills himself, started speaking up more, and started calling me not to request money but to share the steps they were taking on their own. My relationship with them didn't suddenly become warm and close. That would have been unrealistic, but it became honest, and honest is far better than pretending. 6 months later, I received a promotion. I began sleeping better. I stopped reaching for my phone with anxiety every Sunday. I finally allowed myself to create a personal life that didn't center on saving people who only valued me when I was useful. My mother and I still keep some distance between us, but now it is honest distance, not the old pattern where I pretended not to notice what she kept doing. And if there is one thing I learned from everything, it is this. Family is not a free ticket to use someone until they lose themselves in your needs. Love without limits is not noble when it destroys the person providing it. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for yourself, and even for the people who raised you, is to stop shielding them from the results of who they have become. That is where real accountability begins. That is where self-respect returns. And that is where genuine change, if it ever happens, gets a chance to start. If you have ever had to decide between keeping the peace and protecting your dignity, then you already know how costly that lesson is. But you also know this. Walking away does not always mean you abandoned your family. Sometimes it means you finally stopped abandoning yourself. Like, subscribe, and smash that bell before it smashes you. Stay with Reddit Tales Times for chilling twists, haunting tales, and daily doses of the disturbing. You've been warned.